The Sun Devils' defensive line is poised for a breakout this year, and I think Clayton Smith is set to become a superstar.
You are Locked On Sun Devils, your daily podcast on the Arizona State Sun Devils.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Richie Bradshaw, and I will be your guide for everything Arizona State Sun Devils. A special shout out to my everydayers who are here every day, and thanks for making us your first listen of the day. Don't forget, wherever you're getting your podcast, to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you get an update whenever we post new content. Stay in touch with that content by following me on Twitter at RichieBrads36 and the podcast at LO_Sun Devils. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back into the Locked On Sun Devils podcast as we continue rolling through our position by position breakdown series. We are nearing the end as we are now flipping over to the defensive side of the football. And today we are going to be looking at the defensive line. Now, defensive line is going to include both the edge rushers as well as the interior defensive tackles. I think it makes sense to loop them together because of how much they are going to be playing on each other. I think that this is a unit that if everybody is clicking together, Arizona State could have a very special unit. And there's several guys on the defensive line that I'm really, really intrigued with. Some guys that I think could be breaking out big time. Obviously, I highlighted Clayton Smith as one of those guys. And that's where we'll start the conversation. Clayton Smith is going into his second year at Arizona State, a former 5-star / super high 4-star recruit, depending on your outlet. Started his collegiate career at Oklahoma, couldn't get on the field, transfers to Arizona State. He was heavily featured in the team's rotation last year. He was banged up several times. I want to say he was helped off the field 3 different times last year, but he still managed to play the vast majority of the games. He kept himself on the field, and he turned in 4.5 sacks for the team, which was second on the team behind Prince Dorbah and BJ Green's 6-sack performance. Clayton Smith also became a nightmare over the last month of the season, where he recorded 3.5 of his 4 sacks. This kid's a beast, and I mean, he is built for the NFL. He's got the physique, he's got the speed. If he is able to really start converting that speed to power, I mean, the sky feels like the limit for this kid. He is coming into this season as I just had it, 6'4". The site lists him as 230, and I promise you he's going to be closer to 250. When I note one of the first things I noticed in spring ball was that Clayton Smith got bigger. And I remember talking with somebody, and I was like, he looks bigger. Am I wrong? And they were like, yeah, he added like 15 pounds of muscle, at least. He is really growing into his body, and he's still so fast off the edge, and is somebody that has all of the tools to become such a dynamic player that you just can't stop. If everything is ready to click for him in his second year at Arizona State, you will not see him for 3rd season. He's going pro. I think that everything is in place for him. And he's got some really good partners in crime next to him. There's 2 guys that I also think are going to be heavily involved in the rotation. Last year, we saw Arizona State liked rotating with 3 guys primarily, with BJ Green, Prince Dorbah, and Clayton Smith. Those 3 were the most rotated guys. Those 3, unsurprisingly, had the most production with 16.5 sacks combined for the 3 of them. Now I think you're going to have Prince Dorbah once again in that rotation. Again, he had 6 sacks. He was really strong in the first half of the season and kind of quieted down in the second half. I would love to see him put it together for a full 12 or 13 games or however many the Sun Devils are able to get this year. I also really like Elijah O'Neal. And O'Neal is somebody who's been biding his time with this team. And he's going into his senior year. He's developed. He looks like he's arrived. And you could tell that the coaching staff is really high on him, and they felt the same way because you saw during spring ball, he got a lot of first team reps. He got a lot of opportunities to run with the big dogs, and he looked good. And keep in mind, this is also an offensive line that I feel is drastically improved. I talked about it yesterday. So if you missed that podcast, go and check it out because I think that this offensive line could be special. But Elijah O'Neal was giving him hell. It was very, very fun to watch. Just such an intriguing talent for Arizona State off of the edge. Moving to the inside, I think you've got a great 1-2-3 punch here with your defensive tackles. CJ Fite, somebody that I'm very high on, somebody who was basically a full-time starter for ASU last year. He was one of the constants on the team, not just in terms of play, but also in terms of health. He was able to find his way onto the field. He was a big impact when he was on the field. I think that he's once again going to be one of the most relied upon defensive tackles. Now, next to him, I think he's got a couple really good partners in crime. Jacob Kongaika, someone that I will continue to sing the praises of. He was highlighted several times throughout camp by the coaching staff as somebody that they wanted everybody else to model and pay attention to. Jeff Clark, the transfer coming in from Louisville, is my third guy in that three-man rotation. This is a veteran. This is somebody that could play that Nesta Jade Silvera, that Deshaun Mallory role for Arizona State because they have really valued that veteran defensive tackle presence over the last handful of years. Clark could very easily step into that role. It would not surprise me. Those three, I think, would be a really good 1-2-3 punch for you. But there is a lot of other guys at defensive tackle to pay attention to. Tristan Monday going into his second year with the team, really interesting there. And then you've got Kyron Borda, Harold Brooks, and Blazin Lano Wong. Three guys that have really just focused on putting on the weight for themselves and getting to a position where that they can dominate. Harold Brooks, redshirt senior. Tristan Monday, redshirt sophomore. Kyron Borda, redshirt freshman. He got to develop behind the scenes a little bit. Blazin Lano Wong, also a redshirt sophomore, and he's been developing behind the scenes as well. This is a team and a unit that has really kind of taken their time to develop with each other. And if everything is able to culminate together, your defensive tackle unit and the interior of the line entirely is going to be one of the strengths of the team. There's a handful of other transfers that are coming in as well. Justin Wadley, Roman Petrie, and JP Dieter are going to be some of the more important edge rushers for the team. Speaking of transfers, though, two big transfers came in for Arizona State very recently. Defensive linemen from Texas, both of them. Jamond Tapp, a former 4-star edge rusher and was a super high 3-star transfer for the team. And then a defensive tackle by the name of Zach Swanson, who is also a former 4-star player. Funny enough, he played at Brophy High School, so this is another Activate the Valley kid. You got better. You added more depth, and these are two guys that could potentially start for you. I truly mean that. Like, Arizona State has a very good problem to have along the defensive line right now, but they just added two incredibly talented players to increase the competition, go into the rotation, and potentially make big-time impacts in their first year. Jamond Tapp is someone that really intrigues me, someone that was brought to my attention as like hey, you need to keep an eye out on this kid when training camp rolls around. He will have my attention. He could also find himself in that role that Clayton Smith and Prince Dorbah walked into last year, where they got to be a part of the rotation and become very, very good. For Tap, playing off the edge, I think that there's a little bit more opportunity for him than there is Zach Swanson along the interior of the defensive line. Right now, my three-man rotation, like I said, is Clayton Smith, Prince Dorbah, Elijah O'Neal. But none of that is concrete. And Arizona State, even with those three, is going to rotate a lot. But I would not be surprised if Jamon Tap ended up being one of those three guys that gets rotated in the most. He's an athlete. He's a specimen. If they are able to get the most out of him, maybe they just found their new Clayton Smith. We'll wait and see. But next up, we are going to be breaking down my potential depth chart from the team, starting from the defensive line to the edge and key players in the rotation. We're going to hop into that in just a moment. This is the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to spend on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Wherever you get your podcast, hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications so you get an update whenever we post new content. A shout out to my everydayers who are here every day, and thanks for making us your first listen of the day. Back into it now, and we're going to be taking a look at my potential depth chart. Now, I am going to be under the assumption that we're going to run 2 defensive tackles, we're going to run 2 edge rushers, and then I'm also going to highlight my 3 rotation guys that I'm going to throw in, the 3 biggest rotation players at each position. So 2 starters, 3 backups, 5 guys in total for the defensive tackles and for the edge rushers. We'll start with the defensive tackles. My 2 starters, it's not a surprise if you listen to this podcast, you know I'm very high on these 2. CJ Fite, Jacob Kongaika. With these 2, you've got younger guys that could be staples of the team for at least the next 2 years. Fite could be 3 years. Kongaika, transferring in from Arizona, has had time as a rotational player. He's looked solid. You're waiting to see if he can break out, and I think there's a really good chance for him to do so, not just because of the talent by himself, but also for everybody that is surrounding him. There's a lot of really good players here at Arizona State in the front 7 and with the defensive line. Throwing Kongaika next to CJ Fite is a terrifying thought for opposing offensive linemen, to think that they are going to have to handle 2 just massive, strong human beings. It's kind of a pick your poison. With CJ Fite, I know that he's been working a lot on his pass rushing skills and to be able to take that step forward as sack master. One of the expectations that has been placed on him by himself is he wants to take that next step and become Will Sutton. And for everybody that's an ASU fan, that's a high bar. That's a 2-time Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year, one of the all-time great Sun Devils. But if you're gonna set an expectation for yourself, then shoot for the moon, and that's where CJ Fite is. But he, even beyond that, even if he's not a sack guy, he just needs to be a high impact player, somebody that is going to command the respect of the offensive line, someone that can take on the double teams. Him and Kongaika together, really exciting for me. The key rotation guys that I have here, the first one, very obvious, Jeff Clark. I already highlighted him as one of my 3 that I'm paying the most attention to. I think that you're going to see him on the field quite a bit. You're really going to have these 3 guys, Fite, Kongaika, and Clark, that are going to be able to create different matchups. All 3 of them are big, strong, physical bodies. Clark has a ton of playtime experience after being a starter with Louisville. Kongaika has plenty of game time. CJ Fite has game time. They all bring a little something to the table. And when you have those 3 able to play to each other's strengths, you're going to be able to keep offensive linemen off balance. The next two that I have, this was not an easy decision. I ended up going with Blazin Lonawong, someone who has really been working hard the last 2 years for Arizona State, and I think he is primed to finally break out for the team. I think this is the year that everything clicks for Blazin Lonawong. And then I went with Zach Swanson, the transfer from Texas. I do think that there's going to be a little bit of smoke to that fire, and he's going to be walking into a situation where he could get some significant playing time. Of course, that's not a slight to some of the guys like Kyron Borda or Tristan Monday, who I also think could be able to get onto the field. But I think that Zach Swanson came to Arizona State because he knew that he could get onto the field sooner rather than later. And I'm going to buy into that. Moving to the edge rushers, top two starters, Clayton Smith. Obviously, I highlighted him as a potential superstar. And I'm going with Elijah O'Neal as the starter across from him. As I said, Clayton Smith is just built to be a beast. He's someone that is just that untapped potential. And you've seen him scratch the surface of it. Let's see if everything can finally culminate together and if he can blossom into the dynamic edge rusher that not just me, but a lot of people believe he can become. Next to him, Elijah O'Neal. Like I said, this is just someone that has routinely been getting better and better and better. He's getting the opportunities, and I think this is the year that he gets those starts. There is, of course, going to be a heavy rotation. I think for the third guy, it's going to be either Prince Dorbah or Jamon Tapp. I would not be surprised either way. I wouldn't be surprised if they rotate those four guys very heavily. I think Jamon Tapp is someone that they're really intrigued with, and Prince Dorbah has a year in the Brian Ward scheme. He's familiar with his teammates and everything. That's going to be able to play a big factor here for him. The last guy I mentioned, I'm actually going Justin Wadley, who is coming from Cincinnati. He's had a little bit of production. He's somebody that, similar to what I mentioned with some of the other transfers, is I think he's coming to Arizona State knowing that there is a possibility for him to get onto the football field. He's someone that I would also be very curious about where they want to play him because he's 6'3", 275. So they could move him inside for certain packages. I feel like you can get creative with him. And that's the thing that's most exciting for me about Justin Wadley, is knowing that there's an opportunity to have him do more things than one. The edge rushing room, period, is just really exciting. And you got some young guys too. I know Ramar Williams and James Giggy are also players that Arizona State's going to be curious about getting out there. One of the players who really has my attention is Roman Petrie, a transfer from Purdue. He seems like, I won't call him Clayton Smith or anything, but he also seems like one of those guys that is scratching the surface of some high-level potential. I want to know how it ends up shaking out in his first year at Arizona State. Does he end up finding a very significant full-time role with the team? Is this a player that is going to be kind of stashed away and maybe takes the Elijah O'Neal approach and he waits 2 or maybe even 3 years to get onto the field? I don't know, because this edge rushing room is deep, but it also has guys that have playing time. Petrie has not gotten a ton of playing time during his stint with Purdue. And I wonder if Arizona State is going to give him a year to kind of get comfortable and learn the system before he gets a chance to break out next year, because there's a chance next year that Arizona State's looking at a brand new edge rushing room. A big year from Clayton Smith means he's going pro. Justin Wadley is a redshirt junior. He could decide to leave. Who was it? Prince Dorbah is a senior. This is last year of eligibility. You could be looking at a new edge rushing room, which brings me to is Roman Petrie going to find an opportunity? I want to see the way they use him this year. He is one of the most intriguing players for me, is Roman Petrie. But we're going to wrap up this podcast here in just a moment with the upside and the downside as we've been doing. Let's hop right into it. This is the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. One more time, wherever you get your podcast, hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications wherever you get your shows. A shout out to my everydayers who are here every day, and thanks for making us your first listen of the day. Wrapping it up with the upside and the downside of this pass rush, of this edge rushing group, and of this defensive tackle group. The upside, they're going to be good. The upside is this is going to be a dynamic pass rush. I think Clayton Smith alone is going to flirt with double-digit sacks. As of today, I would tell you, I would say 7 to 8 I would be pretty comfortable with. But the talent and the upside is there for him to easily get to that double-digit range. This is someone that is so utterly God-gifted, talented, that you just feel like it's gonna click. At some point, everything's gonna come together for Clayton Smith. And I have little doubt that it's going to happen or that it won't happen. He just looks like he's been putting in the work, not just in the weight room. You can tell that he's working on his hand movements and being able to disengage, being able to convert that speed to power. He's so dialed in. He looked good last year. He looks great after spring ball. If he's able to continue to bring that intensity during training camp, the sky's the limit for this kid. There's going to be good guys next to him as well. I already mentioned them. I think that the absolute highest upside here, you could flirt with 40 sacks. Last year you had 26, and that was a drastic improvement from the year before, where they had 17 as a team, something like that. You're trending upwards in a dynamic way. And with everybody on this team, I don't see any reason they can't continue to get better. 40 is a lot of sacks. I will also tell you that that's Brian Ward's benchmark. I've spoken with him before. He said, look, I like 40 sacks. That's where I want to be. That's the expectation that I place on my kids, is we want to be able to get to that point. Maybe this is the year that they are able to get to that point. There's more than enough talent here. There's more than enough guys that you can look at and go, yep, I can see it. I can definitely see this player being able to help get us to 40 sacks. I can see XYZ players combined for 15 sacks, combined for 16, 17, whatever. I could see the defensive tackles, X, Y, and Z, ABC, being able to really open things up for the blitz. And then the linebackers can come and crash things down. Linebackers we'll talk about tomorrow as well. So again, turn on notifications and like, subscribe so you get that update. There's a chance that this pass rush really just comes alive this year. Because last year, even with 26 sacks, there were still some missed opportunities. They might be able to correct that this year. The last bit of upside I have, I think this could end up being a run defense that just drastically improves from last year. Now, I think that the run defense was a very deceptive stat because ASU's defense played well last year. The problem was the offense just could not could not match that same energy because of injuries, because of inefficiencies, and they left the defense high and out to dry. It happens. It gets the defense tired, they get fatigued, and they can't play as well as what they could when they were feeling better. That resulted in games where teams were just getting so much time of possession and so many long drives and opportunities. I think that not only will you look better in the box score, but I think you're just going to look better as a unit. This is a front seven, and especially the defensive tackle spot, that has big, strong dudes that can control the line of scrimmage. Being able to do that is going to just propel you leaps and bounds to being a great run defense. The downside, I think the biggest thing for me is that you don't get a breakout. I just don't see any way that someone doesn't break out. Clayton Smith, CJ Fite, Jamon Tapp, like someone is going to break out for this team. Hopefully multiple people. But there's also a chance that no one does. There's a chance that this is, once again, a decent unit, not one that is overly dominant. Maybe you are right at that 26 sacks range again. Like, you want to be better than you were last year, but you could also be looking at just not taking that step forward, not having that breakout player. I also am nervous that you're once again going to be in a situation where you're just not able to get as many sacks as you would like. Get to that situation where, sure, you're recording the pressures, and pressures are very good. And I'm somebody that I love pressure, knockdown, all that good stuff. I think that's worth its weight in gold. But we saw last year that ASU was able to dial up pressure, but not being able to finish those plays resulted in big plays down the field and opportunities that you wouldn't have been able to give if you could just finish the play. That's part of ASU's kryptonite on the defense, is finding a way to finish those plays, because when they don't, they get beat. So you got to find a way to finish those plays. I'm not saying it needs to be 40 sacks, but even if it's just 26 sacks again, hopefully you're converting more of your pressures into those sacks. And then I mentioned the run game, taking those massive strides. I can also see them being middle of the pack. I could see them being towards the bottom of the Big 12. You just need to show that you watched the tape last year, that you've been working, you've been in the lab, you've been in the weight room, all that good stuff, to get more stout against the run. But there's no guarantees that that's going to end up being the case. Hopefully it is. But I really like this defensive line. And I know that I can be very biased. I think during this series, I have shown a lot of bias. I've done my best to be objective at the same time. This pass rush, I think that there's 3-4 guys that just have ridiculous potential. I am very excited to see where this pass rush goes this year. And I also believe in Brian Ward's vision to be able to take that step forward from a 26 sack unit to 30 plus, to 35 plus, flirting with that 40 range. This is a unit that I think will be much improved from last year, and they were already a quality unit last year. But I want to know, what do you guys think of the defensive line? Who are your favorite players? Who are you excited about? Who's going to break out for you? I got Clayton Smith. Do you have someone else? Let me know in the comments. You can hit me up on YouTube, or not YouTube. You can hit me up on Twitter at Richie Brads36 and the podcast at LO_Sun Devils, wherever you're getting your podcasts. Hit like, hit subscribe, turn on notifications so you get an update whenever we post new content. A shout out to my everydayers who are here every day, and thanks for making us your first listen of the day. We will be back again tomorrow, continuing our series. As always, we'll be looking at the linebacker position. We're lumping everybody together, and I have a feeling that we're going to see a little bit of the same from last year, but we'll talk about it more in detail tomorrow. I'll see you then. And until then, you keep it locked right here on Locked On Sun Devils.